Good morning and welcome to Walk the Talk. This is a webcast with a difference. You walk, we talk, the ultimate Walk the Talk webinar. We encourage you to listen rather than to watch today's session. So if you can, plug your earphones in, disconnect from your screens and move, whether it's around the house, outside in nature, or simply in and out of that chair. Use the next 45 minutes to be single-mindedly focused, present, and engaged. Now, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days, out of your busy lives to join today. My name is Sean, and I'm one of the coaches and co-founders at Point 3 Wellbeing. We are a training provider focusing on mental health, mindset, movement, and mindfulness. And we want to help as many people as possible to stress less and to smile more. We have a super simple philosophy, that of being a little bit better today than yesterday, a little bit better tomorrow than today, knowing, of course, it won't always go according to plan. And oh boy, 2020 leading straight into 2021, that hasn't really gone to plan, has it? Now, this is episode 1 of our Walk the Talk series. For years, we've been talking about creating content. We didn't know what that would be. Would it be a webinar, a podcast? We landed at a webcast. To open up those conversations we wish we had been privy to as busy professionals when we were working back in the corporate world. So why now? Well, in the month it gives us another lockdown, and a year that is filled with yet more uncertainty, we know people are struggling, and that is okay. Through this series, we will look to tackle those burning issues to help individuals stress less and smile more. Every episode, we will speak to a different expert voice within the space of well-being and mental health. And we hope this will allow you to better support your own mental health, your own mindset, your own well-being, and in turn to be able to support those around you. Because we know that healthy people lead to healthy business. So, without further ado, I am super proud to welcome the incredible Dr. Megan Swanson onto today's episode. It feels only right that we have Megan along, as she has been with Point 3 from the very start. Now, Megan is incredibly humble, so I'm going to have to do the bragging for her. Now, we first met Megan at one of our Hit and Chills back in 2018, a session we ran focused on movement and mindfulness. It was painfully obvious during that session that Megan was incredibly fit and athletic. You're welcome, Megan, both in mind and body. And on talking after the session, we discovered that alongside this, she was an absolute expert in that mind-body connection. So Megan, she specializes in sports psychology. She is an NHS clinical psychologist. She just happens to be an incredible runner and has ticked off numerous marathons. And she's an incredible human. So Thanks for taking time out of your busy life to chat with us today, Megan.
Thank you. Wow. I come here every morning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm here to blow some hot air. That's what we're all about.
Well, I am always grateful to talk with you and Sarah and Nikki, because what you do is so important and so impactful and reaches so many people. So thank you for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure, Megan. And you do know more than anyone really about what we do, because we get you to basically look over all of our content that we create. We want to make sure that someone with that doctorate has given all of our content a rubber stamp. So thank you so much for investing so much of your time and your energy into supporting us.
No, it's great. I love reading it. I'm always made to think more, and I get new ideas when I read your things, and everything that you do is so thoughtfully put together, and I'm grateful to be a part of it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Megan. So today we're looking to have a conversation, and we want to talk about how we can move from burnout to burn bright in 2021. So over the course of today's session, we're going to start by looking at the problem and the context of burnout, and then we'll dive into a little bit of the science of stress and why so many of us are feeling this at this point in time more than ever. From there, we then want to look at how we can move from awareness of that thing that we are experiencing, that we're all experiencing, this highly stressful state, into action, because this can enable us to perform and to thrive rather than simply to survive, enabling us to hopefully burn bright in 2021. And off that action, we want to encourage all of you on the line to take a little bit of a manifesto so that you can really burn bright. And we'll be finishing with a Q&A on questions from you guys. We've already received a bunch of questions in the lead up to this, so thank you so much for taking the time to send those in. If you have any questions during the session that you want to throw our way, we got some time at the end to look to cover off those. So do throw those into the Q&A, and we will look to answer as many of those as we have time for. So let's dive into the problem, the context. Why burnout? Why is it important today, particularly during this pandemic that we find ourselves in? Well, we are working from home, or as many have termed it, we are living at the office. There is a lack of boundaries, work, home, parenting. There's the environment never changes, and we are juggling so many things. And of course, because of this, there is so much uncertainty, and anxiety is on the rise. In fact, it has increased since pre-pandemic by as much as 42%, studies would suggest. And when it comes to burnout specifically, a recent study by Gallup shows that 76% of employees experience burnout at least sometimes, and 28% so they are burned out very often or always at work. Employees who frequently experience work burnout are 63% more likely to take a sick day and 23% more likely to visit the emergency room. But why is this? So let's first start by unpacking what burnout is. So Megan, how would you describe burnout?
So burnout is broadly defined by the World Health Organization as an occupational phenomenon caused by chronic workplace stress. It was first brought into the conversation in the mid-1970s, and it's marked by three main indicators. The first of those is emotional exhaustion, which is depleted energy, general exhaustion, the sense of negativity. The second is a decreased sense of accomplishment, reduced productivity, cynicism, etc. And the third is depersonalization, which is that feeling that you're just not making a difference in anything that you're doing. So it's not a designated medical or mental illness, but it is considered a mental health issue, and it's of increasing concern to mental health practitioners like myself, as well as employers, because it can lead to further diagnosis of mental illness, such as anxiety and depression. And honestly, it's debilitating in its own right.
It really does sound it, and it's no wonder, therefore, that so many people are experiencing burnout. But why is burnout impacting us so much during the pandemic in particular?
Gosh, so this last year has been so hard on everybody. And I think when we talked about this, I thought about three things that I think are kind of the main things that are causing more burnout. And the first of those is isolation, which obviously is impacting us in so many ways. But I think in terms of burnout, it's we gauge ourselves so much on the people that are around us in similar roles. And right now we can only gauge our performance in our roles in life on ourselves. So we're not able to see other people and have talks about how things are going, how they're doing. So living in isolation, we lose the ability to see those norms. And often we imagine that we aren't meeting expectations in our work lives, home lives, etc., when we're doing our best, and we're likely doing a lot better than we imagine. So remember, we're our own worst critics. So that's, I think, the number one thing. The second thing, which I think comes up a lot for me when I'm talking about burnout, is what I just mentioned, which is expectations. When we started working from home, we thought it would be short term, or certainly significantly shorter than it's been. So now we have no concept of when we'll go back to what we used to see as normal. And because we didn't see it as a concrete change initially, we never perhaps set those clear expectations for what our roles would entail at work or at home. So do we work the same hours as before? Who's going to make dinner? Who's going to do the homeschool? All of those things. And in this past year, we've had so many ups and downs that we likely still haven't made the time to set those expectations for ourselves personally or professionally. And then the third one that equally has come up a lot is lack of transition. So we used to have time to really shift our mindsets from being a friend to being a coworker, a colleague, an employee, a parent, a partner, etc., even if it was just a couple of minutes. And in the last year, we've lost that time to transition completely from one role to the next. And in many instances, we're covering 2 or 3 roles at the same time, which really adds to our stress. But what it does is it takes away our ability to transition and create balance. So I would say those are 3 things that have really added to the burnout within the pandemic.
Absolutely. So those 3 things were isolation, expectation, that self-expectation that we put on ourselves, and that lack of transition. And of course, all of those things, it's no wonder that stress is building up.
Yeah.
Now, in conversations that we've been having, you've been talking a little bit about this stress cycle, which I hadn't really come across before, but I found it absolutely fascinating. Now, stress shows up in our body physically, mentally, and emotionally. And I guess it's only when you start to realize that you realize just how much of an impact it can have in all walks of life.
Yeah.
But what I thought was really interesting is around how you mentioned that if we don't complete the stress cycle, then we start to experience burnout. I'd love you to be able to give a bit of context, because I'm just not going to do it justice, on what the stress cycle is, how you would kind of define it and give it some context.
So the stress cycle it's kind of like a buzzword, I think, right now, but it is conceptually, it can be difficult for us to understand in terms of our own lives and how we create and complete the stress cycle. So I like to equate it to a washing machine cycle. It starts, it cycles, it spins, it ends. So you would never think to stop the washing machine midway through the cycle and take the wash out, would you? Because if you did, it'd be soapy, it would be wet, and it would be super, super heavy. So now think of the stress cycle. It's the same thing. It has a start, which is when you feel triggered, unsafe, anxious, etc. And you have a lot of emotions about a specific person, place, experience, etc. And it has a cycle where you have to face that person, place, or experience. You have to run away from them. You have to figure out what to do, that fight or flight. And then it has an end where you live in the emotion and you have to sort through the cycle and ride it out.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm still there? Sorry, you disappeared.
Yeah, we're still there. Don't you worry.
Okay.
I thought you were just living in that cycle.
No, you disappeared for a minute completely.
I'm still here.
So if we don't allow the cycle to finish, the emotions will feel as heavy as that load of towels that you took out before you finished the spin cycle, which is heavy. And that heaviness doesn't leave until you complete the cycle. So that's essentially the stress cycle. You have a stressor, it creates that anxiety in your body. Your body goes into fight, flight, or freeze, which is when you determine whether you're going to face the lion, run from the lion, or freeze. And once you determine that, then you go towards the end of the cycle and you have to release that stress. And then you start over again. So that's the stress cycle.
Well, then it is no wonder then that we are kind of, I guess, living in this stress cycle more and more and not actually necessarily completing it. But I guess it'd be interesting from your perspective to understand why after these long periods of stress, for instance, it could be the pandemic that we find ourselves in. It might be building up to a really busy project or deadline at work. It may have been back back at university, for instance, and building up to those exams or that dissertation hand-in, why after these long periods of stress, when you would expect that the body would just let all of that fight or flight response kind of dissipate and that's our time to relax, do we often find ourselves getting ill?
Well, so your body is amazing. As we all know, it's capable of incredible things, but it's only meant to handle stress in bursts. So it absolutely is built to handle it, but it's not built to handle long-term chronic stress. And that's where the problems occur, because when we don't complete that stress cycle, then that stress just sits within the body. So when we don't clear the emotions, we hold them in our physical being. And emotions are highly physical. They're neurological events, they're involuntary. And when we're stuck in cycles of chronic stress and we don't allow them to complete, the stress becomes like a poison in our bodies. When it sits, it navigates its way to different systems within our bodies, like the cardiovascular system, the digestive, the endocrine, and it causes a lot of problems. And it physically affects our body in those systems, leading to things like heart disease and IBS. In fact, one of the most common things that I would say I deal with in terms of stress with people is digestive issues that are all connected to stress. So you have to signal to your body that you're safe, secure, and ready to move through the cycle to release that stress and emotions. Otherwise, the stress remains. And remember, chronic stress, like those towels, is heavy. So imagine even like a weight on your shoulders or your back each time you don't complete the stress cycle. Your body is so busy thinking about that weight and how to handle it that it can't possibly hear your immune system saying, hey, there's something going on over here. So that's when it leads to those illnesses.
That's really interesting. I guess when that amygdala, that reptilian part of your brain, is on a high alert during that stressful state, it is simply tuning in to the emotional state of stress rather than listening to the physical manifestation of how it's actually coming to life. You know, is my body depleted of sleep, of nutrition, of whatever it may be? And that obviously has its knock-on effects. And it's therefore no wonder that we start to experience illness at times when we are, in theory, trying to complete that stress cycle.
Yeah.
So why is it that why in your opinion, do we find ourselves getting stuck rather than kind of completing this stress response cycle?
So the short answer is that we think we have completed it. And so we move on. We don't allow our body to know that we're ready to release the stress, keeping in mind that our body and our brain speak a little differently. So take, for example, I think we've all been in the situation where we have something really difficult to talk to our boss about. You think about it, you marinate on it, you're worried about it, you're anxious about it, you kind of stew on it. And then finally comes the time that you actually have to have that conversation. So you go to your boss, you have the conversation, and you face the fear head on. So whatever the outcome of that conversation might be, when you leave, you feel better. And a lot of times that's when we feel like, whew, that stress cycle is complete. Like we've dealt with the stressor and we move forward. But the stress cycle isn't complete. So I think if you're listening in, think about a time when you've had an incident like that and your body leaves that office and you're buzzing. You can feel it inside your body. And it might be, we've all been in that situation. It can be equally something really good. Like you've had an amazing conversation with somebody and you leave it and you're just physically buzzing. We have to actually get rid of the buzz to remove the stress and complete the cycle, and to let your body know that it's safe again. So often we assume that we've dealt with it and we've chosen our response, we've executed it. So how do we move forward? A lot of times the reason that we don't complete the stress cycle is social appropriateness. We feel we're expected to keep it together, We don't want to show an excessive amount of emotion. And fair enough. You shouldn't leave your boss's office like fist pumping and dancing, even if that's something that you're like, oh, it's really what my body's feeling right now. But you do need to get rid of the stress of that event. And you need to find a socially appropriate way to do that. And it's individual for all of us. So it might be that you go back to your desk, you put on some headphones, you listen to some music or to silence, and you just breathe in and out super deeply. You walk around the block of your building, you call your best friend, you go get a coffee and you engage in a conversation with the person behind the counter. Any of those things will help you to complete the stress cycle. And I think thinking back to that incident that you thought of before, where you felt that buzz, we can all sort of feel and remember a time when that buzz has sort of released from our body. And when that has gone, you've signaled your body and your brain that it's safe and you've completed the cycle. But like I said, I think a lot of us think the second you leave that office or you face the stress, we assume that we're done. So that's probably, I think, the biggest reason we get stuck in that cycle.
Okay. So it's really interesting, isn't it? Because that is therefore about that kind of awareness piece. And without awareness, then it's really, really hard to kind of move forwards productively and proactively in a manner that's best going to support ourselves as individuals.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting point as well around that kind of element of, you know what, it could be a single small moment in time rather than necessarily kind of, continuous buildup of things. That is that stressor that we therefore need to release. And actually there's some research that does show that that actually burnout doesn't necessarily come from working excessively long hours. Simply reducing hours will not solve employee burnout. In fact, what kind of some of the studies do show is that that employees that are working 50, 60 hours a week are potentially more likely to suffer it. However, engaged employees, rather than those that are disengaged, are far less likely to suffer from burnout. Those that have job flexibility and tend to work more hours per week than the average employee will often report higher well-being if they feel engaged than those that don't. So when people feel inspired, motivated, supported at work, they tend to do more work. But what it's important to note is that work is significantly less stressful on their overall health and well-being. So what I think is interesting kind of going through all of this is realizing that it's kind of these different points in time that can impact us, but it's not necessarily the sheer volume. And I think as a manager, it's really, really, really useful to think about that, to think about how you can support those that you work with, those people that you manage. If you keep them engaged, then they're less likely to be impacted by burnout. And so we want to therefore focus on the solutions rather than necessarily the problem today. So, Megan, how would you prevent, or should I say, how can we ensure we burn bright in 2021 rather than burn out?
Well, so I think it goes back to feeling our emotions and completing the stress cycle, first of all. So Emily Nagoski, who's the author of the book Burnout, one of my favorite quotes from her is, "Emotions are tunnels. You have to go all the way through the darkness to get to the light at the end. And exhaustion happens when you get stuck in the emotion." So that being said, I think there's kind of, again, we've got the theme of threes today. There's three things that you can do to sort of help avoid burnout. So the number one is psychological safety. At the organizational level, that's understanding how your individual employees best communicate and meeting them where they're at in that communication style, because we're all different. And when we're in an office environment, we kind of naturally communicate in the way that works best for us. But now we've really had so much of those ways taken away, and we've got to be creative in how we communicate, because that meeting somebody where they communicate best is really important in them feeling psychologically safe. Ensure that they feel safe and open to express their needs. Make sure that you're allowing them to feel in their workplace and in their lives that they're safe to be themselves, and allow them to feel present and engaged. So you want people to feel that they're an important part of the process that you're doing within your organization. So another thing that I think is so important at the managerial level is modeling behaviors that show balance and open sharing of feelings. So if they're not doing it at the top, then everyone down is not going to feel that that's a safe or normal expectation of them to do either. At the individual level, you need to ensure that you're allowing your voice to be heard and understand your own pathways to stress relief and make sure that you're utilizing them. It goes back to being in isolation. More than ever, we have to be accountable. And in doing so, that means we have to make our voice heard. We have to make sure that we understand expectations and that we're taking care of ourselves and doing self-care things like movement, breathing, etc. throughout the day, which moves me into number 2, which is movement and mindfulness. The number one way to complete the stress cycle and avoid that burnout, chronic stress, is to move your body any way that works for you. This can literally be anything. Everyone is so different in what kind of movement is going to work for them. It can be like, for some people, like dancing, some people it's going to be yoga, some people it's a walk, some people it's just like standing up and down at their desk. It's stand-up desks, it's a million little things that you can do to move throughout your day, but it needs to be consistent and it needs to be intentional. So taking that time. So I think sometimes people are like, well, I went up and down the stairs to get my coffee 5 times. But in those 5 times, are you thinking, this is the time where I need to dedicate myself to move and be and breathe? So it needs to be intentional and it needs to be consistent. So I would say, especially now, if you can intentionally move every couple of hours, even if it's just for a couple of minutes, that will significantly help break down your chronic stress. Mindfulness is also a really important tool. And one of the things that I think about when I think about mindfulness is routine. Creating a routine that you can follow each and every day, or most days, is important. And that routine needs to include time for movement, productive work time, etc. And it's going to be a guide that helps you remain accountable and ensure that you're engaging in self-care. So again, these are highly individual and they can be motivated at an organizational level through modeling of behaviors and making space and time for each. So we've found in the mental health practitioner realm that organizations that express to their employees the importance of these things, and even perhaps bring in someone to model mindfulness activities or walk through breathing exercises, that really helps employees more frequently engage in them themselves. And it helps define positive expectations and clear out that chronic stress. The third thing is talking. So we're social creatures. We need and thrive on communication and teamwork environments. And when that's removed, we have to be much, much, much more purposeful about how we communicate. Many of us feel like we talk all day for our jobs, but have you had like just a general chat with a coworker or a friend, a talk about nothing and everything? Have you reached out to somebody that you might normally not and just said hi? Have you talked to the person, the checker at Waitrose or your mailman? These little tiny conversations lift our mood and they help to clear out stress. So as managers, thinking about little or big ways that you can unite your teams and allow for them to have some more natural communication with one another that they might really be missing right now. Checking on them just to check on them. Maybe make a meeting on a Friday to tell them to clock off and remind them that you're there to support them, understanding that they have really full plates right now that include a lot more than their job. So the more that you support and the more that you allow for understanding, the more effective they'll actually be in that time that they dedicate to their work.
That's amazing. So those 3 things again, because we are point 3, and I'm glad that you've bought into the...
Really?
Absolutely. So it's psychological safety. It's creating that safe environment for your teams, the people that work within your business, to feel like they are safe and secure in their role, in their position. And then moving from that, it's around kind of opening up space to allow movement and mindfulness. And on an individual level, making sure that you are doing that with real focus and it's dedicated time to do those things, even if that is as short as 5 minutes. In fact, at point 3, one of our favorite things to do, and yes, I definitely feel silly doing it, is dance it out. So as a team, we step up, we take it in turns to put a song into our daily Zoom meeting, and we just dance it out. Now, I do not dance well, so I move it out in some way that I feel like might be dancing. But I tell you what, whilst you feel silly at the start of that, at the end of that, you feel so good. You feel light, and all of those kind of worries, anxieties, fears that you had at the start, yes, they may not have completely dissipated, but my word, you certainly do feel uplifted afterwards. And then I guess finally, your third point was around kind of talking and opening up that conversation. And I think that's one of the big things that we are hearing in businesses. We're hearing so many people coming to us and asking kind of, how do we create that water cooler moment? Because nowadays, with all of these conversations happening over Zoom, it's become quite formal, it's become quite transactional. It's very much around, what are you doing as an individual to hit your targets, deadlines, whatever that may be. But actually, we're not communicating on that human level. And I think that kind of ties back into that earlier point around, if we're not communicating on that human level, then people can start to question, what is my role within this organization? Am I simply here as a worker bee, or am I actually a human part of this piece and helping it to grow, and I understand my role within it? And I guess talking is one of these kind of simple things that as managers we often shy away from, but it can be simple. It can be as simple as just picking up the phone and just finding out, how are you? What's going on in your life outside of work? And it is proven that those individuals that feel that their manager invests that time in them tend to be more engaged, tend to be more productive at work. So I'm going to throw this out to the chat function. Actually, I would love to hear how you guys in your businesses are doing in terms of kind of recreating that water cooler moment. What are the things that you've seen that are maybe working really well? What are those things that maybe you could do better? Would love to hear that. So if you would feel comfortable sharing, would love to share a few of those towards the end. And whilst I leave you with that to ponder or to kind of think about, I'm just going to throw in there my matchbox analogy. And this for me has been a really simple way for me to define how I'm doing in terms of my kind of overall energy levels and how I'm trying to make sure that I burn bright rather than burn out. And this analogy is very much around thinking about your life as a box of matches. Now, a box of matches has a finite number of actual matches in there. And each time we do something stressful, whether that's a tough and challenging conversation with a colleague, a loved one, maybe it's diving into homeschooling suddenly, having just come off a busy meeting, maybe it's extreme forms of exercise rather than replenishing forms of exercise. Each time we do that, we in essence burn a match. Now, what we are so often doing is burning so many matches during the week that by the end of that week, we look in that matchbox and it's virtually empty. We're literally running on fumes. But what we're not often finding time to do is to think about those times in the week that we can replenish that matchbox, that we can add a couple more matches in order to enable us to burn bright next week and the week after and the week after that. And I know that at this point in time, so many of us are juggling so many different things, but it really is so important to think about how you're putting those matches back into your box, because by doing that, you're going to be able to better support yourself and better support those around you. So This is where we move on to our Burn Bright 2021 manifesto. And I would like you to complete this sentence with 3 things that will make you feel like you are replenishing those matches. I will burn bright in 2021, so long as I. Now, I would encourage you to add frequency and duration into this in order to make it something that you can really hold yourself accountable to be able to make it one of your priorities that don't get pushed off that to-do list. And I'm going to give you an example of my own. And Megan, I'm going to throw this over to you and ask for maybe one of your own examples.
Okay.
So for me personally, I will burn bright in 2021, so long as I dance it out with my team at least once a day for a minimum of 1 minute. So the duration, 1 minute, is pretty easy to fit into my day. And I know that the frequency is every single day, Monday to Friday. Maybe we won't jump on those team calls during the week. So Megan, have you got one that you would like to share with us to help you burn bright in 2021?
Yeah, so one for me that I am implementing is 10 minutes of football with my 8-year-old every day. So it's easy to fit in. It's 10 minutes. It's every day, and it's beneficial for both him and me. And I can literally do it inside, outside. We have an inside football. And it's something that's been, really positive for me to release stress each day and just have fun with him.
Brilliant. Awesome. So that's about that family connection and alongside the little bit of the movement. Absolutely love that. Thanks so much for sharing, Megan.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pass this over to you guys to just think about when you will burn bright, how you will burn bright in 2021. So answer this question. I will burn bright in 2021, so long as I. And remember to put a frequency and a duration on that. Now I'm going to give you 1 minute there to think about that. You might want to jot that down onto your phone, because by writing these things down, you will become more accountable to yourself and you will become 50%, yes, 50%, studies would suggest, more likely to achieve these things. So I'm going to give you a minute there to think about that now. And whilst you're doing that, I'm just going to read out a couple of these from the audience. So thank you so much for sharing. So we had a Brew Monday instead of Blue Monday. I love the pun there. Encouraged a coffee morning to check in with a colleague. Our team are working different days and hours, so we have a call at the end of the week. No work talk, just a chance to catch up what TV we're watching, how the kids are, a chance to no doubt moan about our partners, dry January updates, veganary, whatever it may be. Awesome, love that. And I do think those moments to just kind of talk on a level outside of work is so powerful. One from Gemma. I have a client who now has one-to-one catch-ups with a team as a walking phone call, great for movement. At point 3, we absolutely love walkie-talkies. We so encourage people to get out, get on the phone. It makes it less formal than being sat here on a video call. And Nicola French has just added to that. Love that. We have introduced walkie-talkie meetings. So folks, if you've not yet had an opportunity to complete those 3 things, do spend some time after today's session just thinking about those 3 things, and remember to prioritize them, because they so often get pushed off that to-do list when life becomes busy. Even just a couple of minutes of doing those things will be so powerful. Okay, folks, so ahead of today's session, we asked you guys if you had any particular questions to throw them out to us. And this is also an opportunity, if you have any further questions off the conversation we've had so far today, to jump into that Q&A function and to pop them in there now. And we'll try and answer a few of those. But I'm just going to cover off a couple that came through ahead of the session. So Megan.
Yes.
What can managers do to spot the early signs of burnout in their people?
So, as I previously mentioned, check in just to check in is the best way that you can do it. Make sure that you create a space for your employees to be open and honest in those check ins. And, like you mentioned, a huge part of that is asking how they're doing, what their family is, just kind of better understanding the holistic view of your employees. Perhaps a weekly meeting about work is replaced, like some of you said, with a work meeting where you just talk about how things are going personally and have multiple platforms with which you're communicating with them in. So that might be Zoom, Teams, email, WhatsApp, walkie-talkies. Just really try and understand how they best communicate and be mindful of the fact that they may be burnt out on one form of communication, and meet them in the place that works the best, because that's when they're going to be the most open.
I love that. So once again, it kind of comes back to that talking and I guess being able to provide empathy to
Yeah.
those that you work closely with, because I think one of the things that really resonated that you said earlier was around the fact that it might not just be the job that is causing us extreme stress at this point in time. There are so many individual layers there that we, as managers, if we become more aware of that, we can better support our people.
Yeah.
Another question that we had in was, how can we tailor the steps to alleviate workplace stresses to aid with the multitude of extraordinary stresses many of us are facing in the current COVID impacted climate?
So there's a lot of stress that's happening right now. And obviously, we all know that it's multi-layered. And the number one thing that we can do as individuals is ask for what we need and remember the expectations. And remember that at a managerial level, but also at a personal one. Remember that often we're creating expectations for ourselves that are far more stringent than those that happen in reality. And often when we do that, we feel like we're failing across the board when in reality, we're not. So, for example, most of us are wearing multiple hats when we're at home, i.e., our office. And on some days, we may feel like we've only put in 3 hours of productive work, and we feel really guilty about that because we've had to cook dinner, buy groceries, take the kids to school or homeschool or whatever. But in reality, that may be meeting the expectation of our organization. And those 3 hours may have been amazing and really highly engaged. And obviously, that's not going to be every day. So it's you understanding your expectations, asking for what you need, but also at a managerial level, making sure that those expectations are clear and that you're creating a space for open dialogue so that there's a little bit more peace of mind and that people can let go of the guilt as they jump from one role to the next when duty calls, as it does throughout the day.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we are changing those hats so regularly, aren't we? And I think it's
Yeah.
those boundaries as well are becoming harder and harder to build in and to define which hat am I wearing at this point in time.
Yep.
Another question we had was around, do you think men and women might have been impacted differently during the pandemic by burnout?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. And Sean and I had a great conversation about this yesterday. Yes, absolutely. So I think that we're going through the same thing and we're all struggling in so many ways. But I think that's what's really stood out for me is that men aren't communicating perhaps in the same way that women are. They aren't keeping a hold of the community in the same way either. So, although they might be extremely social and outgoing in their normal life, they also might be less apt to reach out and text a coworker just to say, like, what's up? How's it going? And I think that while everyone's filling a role, it seems in my experience that most of the women are taking on the role as a family communicator, or the community engagement officer of the household, which means that they have that little extra community that they're engaging in an ongoing basis that's supporting each other and helping to gauge those norms together and working towards solutions together. And men might be missing that piece as well. And this is like very general. So there may be men on this call that are like, no, I'm actually doing that. I'm communicating with the school. Absolutely might be the case. Just from what I have seen, that's typically been the mom. So the man might be doing all the homeschooling, but she might be the one communicating with the mom groups or something like that, or the friend groups. So I guess the bottom line is, I don't know if I can say that one is struggling more than the next. Typically, women are less likely to complete the stress cycle and more likely to just put a smile on and carry about the day. But I think in this pandemic, men are really feeling as though they have to push emotions and feelings down more than perhaps previously was normal. And they're not able to communicate in a way that is typically effective for them in communicating with coworkers, friends, community. And I think that we'll see that in months to come. So I do think it's important to work on how we all communicate. And like I said before, meeting people where they communicate best, but also understanding as men and women that we have to make the space to reach out to people, even if it's uncomfortable, and just say, hey, what's going on?
Thank you so much for that, Megan. Really appreciate your answers there. I think that's about time. That's about all the time that we've got today in terms of covering off questions. I'd like to quickly finish by just asking you the 3 things you prioritize to optimize your well-being.
So for me, the number one is community, and that's family, friends, making sure I'm communicating and reaching out, having those conversations on a regular basis. Number 2 is always going to be movement. For me, it's critical that I move. And number 3 is routine, making sure that I feel like I've got a space to do a good job at my job, do a good job as a mom, be a good partner. And that's not going to work every day. But making sure that I have a set routine and I'm mindful about it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's about all the time that we've got for today. Megan, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on and talk to us today. I could have spoken to you for hours.
Same.
45 minutes. We will probably jump on a call straight after this. If you guys that are on the line have any further questions that you want to throw either over to myself, to Megan, around well-being, mental health, mindset, how we can burn bright in 2021, then you've got the email there, bewell@point3wellbeing.com. And if we can support your team or your business on an organizational level, then please do not hesitate to reach out. We do know that by training managers, it is going to have such an impact to enable your business to have greater health day to day. Now, our next episode of Walk the Talk will be on Wednesday, the 3rd of March at 9:30 a.m. And we've got Gemma Boulevant, who is a HR coach, a mentor, and a consultant who will be on that session, on that episode, to talk about psychological safety. We will send out a registration link after this for all of you to be able to register. Hopefully you enjoyed today's session. As always, if you've got any feedback or if there's any burning topics that you would like us to cover, then please do not hesitate to get in touch. But that's all from us today. So Megan, once again, a huge thank you for joining today. And we hope that everyone on the line enjoyed the session.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. And thanks for all your awesome questions.
Awesome. Okay, folks, well, take care. Have a lovely rest of the day. Be well, be safe. And we look forward to catching you all again very soon. For the time being, take care.